All right, and welcome to lesson 4 for hazardous materials operations. Tonight we're going to continue talking about information gathering. We're going to add on response assistance and then also incident management. So with information gathering, we've talked about some places we can get some information already, the SDS, the safety data sheet. We've also talked about shipping papers, and there's various types of those from different transportation aspects. We're going to add on to that. We're going to talk about the emergency response guidebook. Also other reference materials will be the NIOSH pocket guide, the NFPA fire protection guide to hazardous materials, the hazardous materials field guide, and the quick selection guide to chemical protective clothing. Tonight, we're going to focus mostly on the emergency response guidebook. So here's what the emergency response guidebook looks like. It should be in every emergency response vehicle. There's also apps you can put on your smartphone. It comes out every 4 years. It's republished with any additional additions or changes, modifications. The most recent one is the 2020 version. The way they're used is pretty much all the same. So that's why this one just says 2012. Not a big deal. So how are we going to use the emergency response guidebook and what can it do for us? Here's what it does. It offers general information to a hazard class or a group of hazards. Remember, a hazard class is that DOT hazard class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or a group of hazards. Keep in mind, it does not offer product-specific information. Last class, we talked about chemical and physical properties of chemicals. It does not provide that type of information. If you're looking for the specific chemical and physical properties, you're going to want to look in the NIOSH Pocket Guide or another resource. The emergency response guidebook's good for about the first 30 minutes of an incident. It's good in the recognition, the identification, and notification portion of an incident. Okay, it gets things started. It gives you a game plan to start managing an incident when you might have no idea how to do so. You have no familiarity with the product or the material, and so this will help get you started, based again on groups of hazards. It has several sections, and they are color-coded pages. Each color-coded page section has a specific purpose. So the white colored pages provide general information and training. It helps you learn how to use the book. The yellow section, very important. The yellow section are a list of materials by their UNID. So if you have a UNID number and nothing else, you look it up in the yellow section to help identify the material you're dealing with. The blue section, these are materials listed by the chemical name. So if you have the name of the chemical, you can look it up in the blue section. You can also use these together to cross-reference and make sure you're dealing with the materials you think you're dealing with. The orange colored pages are the emergency response guides. These are 2 pages long, and they tell you how to start managing this incident. The orange section are the emergency response guides. The green section are the protective action distances. We'll get more into that. But protective actions are evacuation and shelter in place. And we'll talk more about that green section later. So each section has useful information, and they all work together. So more specifically, the white section serves as introduction to the emergency response guidebook. It tells you how to read shipping papers, step-by-step instructions, and user's guide for the ERG. It lists emergency helplines. It lists the hazard classifications, that 1 through 9, if you've forgotten that. There is a table of placards. We'll talk about that. And rail car and over-the-road trailer identification charts. So if you don't remember what a DOT 407 looks like, this will help you. The white section provides that information. Again, the yellow section is listed, or chemicals listed by UN ID number. So when you know that, but not the chemical name, or maybe you do, you're just trying to match them up. The UN ID number can be found on placards, shipping papers, and the MSDS, and now known as the SDS. So for example, in a shipping paper, it says UNID is 1219. You know that is isopropanol. Just look up the UNID. It's always 4 digits. They're listed numerically. Remember that just like, so look at the numbers 1016, UNID number 1016. There are 2 entries for 1016. That means that a UNID number can be assigned to more than one entry. But carbon monoxide by itself can only be 1016. There's no other carbon monoxide listed in here. So with the UN number, the appropriate guide number is easy to identify and locate in the orange pages. So for example, carbon monoxide, you'd look up that 1016 from the placard, and the guide number is 119. So then you go to the orange section and look up guide 119. That's how that works. You take the UN number, go to the guide, find out what the guide number is, and then you go to the guide page with that number and start reading and do what it says. Some materials are deemed to be toxic inhalation hazards, or TIH, and protective action for the public will be needed. How do you know which ones these are? They are highlighted in yellow in the yellow section. So if the entry for the material is highlighted in yellow, then refer to the green section, the green pages, for initial isolation and protection action distances. So continue with our example of carbon monoxide. It is highlighted yellow. So before you go to the orange guide page, or if you have 2 books, have one person go into the green pages, one person go into the orange pages. You have to look in both places. The blue section, these are chemicals listed by name. That's when you know the chemical name and you're trying to find out you're always trying to find out what guide number to use. Or if it's a TIH, what protective actions you need to take. Where can you find the name? Excuse me. You can find them in shipping papers, in the material safety data sheets or safety data sheets. Sometimes they're stenciled on the container. That's how you know the name. So isopropanol. Simply look it up. They're listed alphabetically by name. So you have the name, then the guide number, and then you can cross-reference with the UNID if you know what it is. That way you have much more confidence that you're dealing with that material. You determine the guide number again, go to the orange section with that guide number, and you're on your way to solving the problem. Just like in the yellow section, some materials are deemed to be toxic inhalation hazards, TIH. They are also highlighted, but this time they're highlighted in blue. That means you need to go to the green section to determine your isolation distance and protective action distances. But what if you don't have a UNID identification number or a chemical name? That's where placards come in. So in this example here, we have 2 placards. Remember, this is a box tractor trailer truck. It can hold multiple materials. For example, here we have 2 damaged sticker type placards, not legit placards, but we'll go with it. What do we know? Remember, there's 4 pieces of information that are on a placard. There's the color, the symbol, usually the UNID number, or in this case, words, hazard words, and the hazard class. So in the first one on the left, it is a white placard. That means it's not flammable, it's not an explosive, it's not radioactive, it's not dangerous when wet. Many times in hazardous materials identification, we can tell you what it's not. We cannot guarantee you, we can tell you what it is, we can tell you what it's not. So it's none of those things. We have a skull and crossbones symbol. That means it's toxic or poison. And then a hazard class 6. The one to the right, red color, that means it's flammable. We have a flame symbol, again confirming the flammability of the word flammable, and a hazard class 3. Remember, there's 2 types of flammable hazard class 3 and class 4. Class 3 is flammable liquids, and class 4 is flammable solids. So this being a class 3, it's going to be flammable liquids. But you can also use the white section, white pages of the ERG to look up the placards. So if you don't have a UNID number and you don't have a chemical name, find the table of placards, and then they're grouped together with a guide number. For example, this one here shows a guide number of 123, and you can go to guide 123 in the orange section and start managing this incident. The orange sections, here's where you start getting information on what to do, actions to take. Keep in mind that the orange section provides general guidelines for response based on chemical families and similar reactions. Okay? They are not product specific. They put materials in a group, and this is what you should do for that group of materials. Each guide is 2 pages. There's a left and right. So you don't have to change pages at all. Don't have to flip pages. It's just either left or right. There's 3 categories of information that they provide information on. Those are potential hazards, public safety, and emergency response. So potential hazards, that's going to be the thermal, biological, explosive, mechanical, all those types of harm. Public safety is going to tell you how far away you should make your isolation zone, what your hot zone should be, and an emergency response, what you can do to help make this incident better. The green section. This table provides isolation and protective action distances for toxic inhalation hazardous materials. Think about that. Toxic inhalation hazardous materials. That means they're all going to be gases. These are all going to be gases. They divide them into small and large spills, and whether they occur during the day or the night. So how do you use the isolation table? So you find the UNID number for the material from the yellow or blue section. They're going to be highlighted. You go to the green section. Then you determine if it's a small or large spill. What's the difference? Small spill is less than 52.83 gallons or 200 liters, and a large spill is greater than 52.83 gallons or greater than 200 liters. Remember, this is a spill. This is how much material is outside its container, not the size of the container. It's how much is outside of the container, the size of the spill. For practical purposes, consider a 55-gallon drum and how much would be in that. If a 55-gallon drum is tipped over and it's leaked out its higher contents, now we're right, you might as well go with a large spill. If it's a 406 trailer and it's all of its contents are outside of the trailer, then it's a large spill. If it's a 406 and it's got this little bitty drip and there's a little bitty puddle on the ground, that is a small spill. Okay, so we have the UNID number, then we decide whether it's a small or large spill, then we decide is it day or night. Once you have all that information, then it will tell you to isolate first in all directions. Remember, the initial isolation zone is the shape of a circle, and it is a radius from the outer edge of the visible spill or the location of the spill. This is going to be the location of the spill, where it's exiting the container. The initial isolation zone is a circle. You're going to means nobody in that area. For this example, it's 100 feet or 30 meters. Okay, nobody inside that. So that means nobody goes in there. And if somebody's in there, they need to get out. Okay, so if you establish that isolation zone, the initial isolation zone, then protect downwind, depending on whether it's day or night. So this area is a somewhat of a keyhole pattern. You take your initial isolation point, you move downwind, how far it says. So for the example, during the day here, it's 0.1 miles. So from the point of the spill, you go downwind 0.1 miles, and then you go left or right of that. So in this case, it'd be 0.05 miles. And that is how wide your protective action zone is. We'll talk about, and protective action is either evacuation or shelter in place. Those are your two choices. We'll talk about the considerations on which one you choose later. Some people ask, why the difference between day and night? Some of it has to do with how, if you'll notice that the night distances are longer, mostly because of visibility and getting people to move or to take action. It's going to take longer, so you want to extend that distance. It's not because materials know the difference between day and night and they decide to go farther. It's, or atmospheric conditions, because there's different atmospheric conditions regardless of day or night. So it's mostly about visibility and getting people to do what you need them to do. So how it works. Let's go through an example. Step 1, find the placard number or chemical name. So we're going to use the yellow or blue sections to identify the material from a placard or shipping papers. Okay. So we've got isopropanol, UNID of 1219, and the guide number is 129. Okay. In this example, isopropyl isocyanate is highlighted. That makes it a toxic inhalation hazard. So we go to the green section as well as the guide number. This example, we have ammonia, guide number 125. So we're going to guide 125 in the orange section. As you can see, the main section there is potential hazards, public safety, and emergency response. Tells you all what to do. You can also go to the green section, and you're going to first isolate 100 feet. Now, if we go back one, it says evacuation spill under public safety. So initially, if you don't even go to the green section, this tells you to isolate spill or leak area immediately for 100 to 200 meters, which is 330 to 660 feet in all directions. Remember, that's a circle. But we could also just do 100 feet. Remember, remember we talked about how the guides are general. So this is for all gases that are corrosive. Okay, this applies to all gases that are corrosive. The green section is product specific. That's why we know that ammonia, anhydrous ammonia, we can isolate for 100 feet or 30 meters. This doesn't know, the guide doesn't know we're dealing with ammonia specifically. So this covers all of the corrosive gases. That's why it's different. So the first thing we're going to do with ammonia leaking, nobody goes in within 100 feet of the leak. Then we'll figure out our wind direction, and downwind during the day, 0.1 miles. And then for a small spill, remember that's outside the container. So to sum up, in general, the ERG provides fast information on what to do in the first few minutes of an incident, usually about 30 minutes. 3 hours later, you're not going to be using the ERG. You should have already gone through everything in that already. Either continuing those operations, you're not going to find new information. It also provides rapid identification of toxic inhalation hazardous materials, provides initial guidance on protective actions, and can be used as a tool for both planning and a response. So we talked about pre-planning being part of a response agency. If you know that you have a above ground propane tank at a business, or say it's a farming supply place and they have anhydrous or like I said propane, that is fixed. That is going to be there no matter what. You can determine already if you have a spill or a leak, you can figure out using this book what your isolation distances are, and you can set those up and say, oh, at this corner is where 100 feet is, for example. Now we know, have that all planned out. If the wind's coming from the west, this is where our command post is going to be. If the wind's coming from the south, this is where our command post is going to be. Things like that. This is where staging is going to be. Use the book to do your pre-plan. All right, so now we're going to do an activity using the ERG. Okay. Pages organized numerically by the 4-digit UNID number are what color? They are yellow. Pages organized by material name are what color? Blue. Make sure you have proper spelling. Misspelling may result in a disaster. Consider this list of chemicals here. Methyl cyclohexane, methyl cyclohexanols, methyl cyclohexanone. Sounds very similar. All three of them sound very similar. But look at the guide numbers. You have 128, 129, and 127. Remember, the guides are based on chemical families. There's different actions to take, different precautions to take for each one. Each one of those chemicals listed there has a different guide number. That means they will be treated differently. So if you have on the ground or in the air methyl cyclohexane, but let's do it this way. You have methyl cyclohexanol, but somebody writes down methyl cyclohexanone, you're going to be doing the wrong thing. That's why it's good to cross-reference with the ID number as well. Get as much information as you can to try to figure out, have the highest amount of confidence in what chemical you have. The action guides are what color pages? They're orange. Keep in mind also that the hazard listed first under potential hazard section is the greater hazard. So if it's health or fire or explosion, that's what's going to be listed first. That's what you need to protect for first. Also remember that a small spill is less than 52.83 gallons and a large spill is greater than 52.83 gallons. Each guide in the ERG is how many pages long? That number is 2. They're always 2 pages long. If you have a UNID, if you have an ERG sitting around, normally I do this live with multiple books. We'll do this at our practical. What's the UNID number for fuming sulfuric acid? So we look up sulfuric acid, comma, fuming. And we find out the UNID number is 1831. Find out what the guide is. What section would we look at? We would look up in the blue section because that's what where materials are listed by their name. So what's the guide page number or guide number? It's 137. Sodium hydroxide, we look it up in the blue section, find out what the guide number is. It's 154. And with sodium hydroxide, what's the treatment for a victim splashed with a sodium hydroxide? We looked at in the first aid section under the emergency response. Move the victim to fresh air, assist ventilation, remove contaminated clothing, flush skin or eyes for a minimum of 20 minutes, and keep victim warm and quiet, calm. If fire was involved in the tank truck delivering sodium hydroxide, how far would we isolate in all directions? 800 meters or half a mile. What's the primary hazard? Remember, that's the one listed first. The health. What product has a 4-digit UNID number of 1049? So we go to the yellow section of the ERG and find out it's hydrogen. Then we'd find out what the guide page is. It's 115. We go to the orange section and find out the primary hazard for hydrogen is fire and explosion. If there's a tank involved, if a tank is involved in fire for hydrogen, we would fight the fire from a maximum distance using unmanned hose lines, cool the containers with flooding amounts of water, withdraw immediately in the case of a rising sound from venting safety devices. We'll talk about Chemtrac in the next section. If you need more help than what the ERG can provide you, there is a service called Chemtrac, and their toll-free number is on the inside back cover of the ERG. It's not the only place for it, but that's the easy place to find it, inside the back cover. All right. So this activity, like I said, normally I do this in person, but this activity will be done at our practical. Here's the phone number for Chemtrac. We'll talk about them in a little bit next. Inside back cover of the ERG, or put it in your phone contacts. Very helpful information source. So response assistance. They have an emergency response center. They will ask you for your name, a callback phone number, maybe a fax number, probably not in these days. Location and nature of the spill, of the problem. So is it spill, something on fire? If you know the name or the identification number of materials involved, who the shipper or the consignee or the point of origin is, the carrier name, rail car, or truck number. You give them all that information. Tell them the container type and size, quantity of material transported, and the quantity of material released. Your local conditions, such as the weather, terrain, proximity to schools, hospitals, waterways, etc. Were there any injuries or exposures? And what local emergency services have been notified? They will help you confirm that a chemical emergency exists. They'll record details in writing and audio. Don't know if it's on tape anymore. They provide immediate technical assistance. They'll contact the shipper of the material or other experts. They'll provide the shipper or manufacturer with your name and callback number so that you can deal directly with them. All right. One more thing with Chemtrac. I have not used them in a training, but I have heard that they will help you in a training. It's best if you call them ahead of time and schedule it so that in the event that they're dealing with an actual emergency, you won't interrupt that. Give them a call. They'll help you out. If you don't know what else to do, call Chemtrac. All right. So now we're going to talk about the incident management system, or the incident command system, ICS. With anything, we have some strategic priorities. These are the things that in general we want to accomplish, and they are in a specific order. They are: number one is life safety, number two is incident stabilization, and three, protection of property and the environment. As with many things in hazmat, we talked about time, distance, and shielding is usually associated with radiation, but it can be applied to chemicals or even hazardous relationships. These strategic priorities can also be applied to other aspects of our lives and other things that we do. Keep that in mind. It's not just for hazmat, it's for fire response or EMS or going on vacation. What are some advantages of using the incident command system? There's common terminology. It's a modular organization style. It expands and contracts based on the needs of the incident. Provides an integrated communication program. provides unified command structure instead of multiple agencies trying to do their own separate thing. It provides a way for them to get together and handle a problem in a unified manner. It consolidates their action plans and also provides for a manageable span of control. If you're the incident commander and you have so many things going on at an incident, you can't keep control of it, then you have an unmanageable span of control. Incident command system provides you a way as the incident commander to manage your resources. So here is a general organization chart for the incident command system. At the top, you have four members, of the command staff. So at the top is the command staff. You have the incident commander, the public information officer, the safety officer, and the liaison officer. Those are part of the command staff. Below them is the general staff. Operations section chief, planning section chief, finance section chief, and the logistics section chief. And we'll talk about each one of those. Now, this would be for a large incident where you would have a person in each one of these positions. In a smaller incident, consider that you don't need a person in each one of these positions. However, the functions these positions manage do need to be performed by somebody. Because if you think about it, that's 8 people right there. That's a lot of people for our small fire departments in our area. That might be all the people you get is 8 people. Who's going to do the work if they're doing these jobs? So on smaller incidents, the incident commander is probably going to be handling logistics, finance, planning, and operations. There'll be liaison and the public information officer. Notice I didn't say safety officer. And we'll talk about why here in just a little bit. But somebody has to do these jobs. So for example, public information officer. Somebody's going to have to talk to the media probably. Liaison officer. Somebody's going to have to work with mutual aid companies or the shipper or the owner of the material or the owner of the property. That's what the liaison officer does. Operations section chief gets the job done. Somebody's got to manage the incident response. Planning, somebody's got to make sure we got a good plan going together. Finance, if you want to get paid, somebody better be taking care of all the parties involved and how much time this is taking and what materials, what absorbent or whatever we're using, tools we're using to manage this scene. Somebody's got to get a list of that. And logistics, who's going to provide for communications? Are we going to need meals? Are we going to need a bulldozer or a track hoe or something like that? Somebody has to do those jobs. A lot of times on smaller incidents, the incident commander does all those jobs. One way to remember the general staff is you have the command staff. The acronym I came up with is CFLOP, command staff, and then with finance, logistics, operations, and planning. So what is command? It's the function of directing, ordering, and controlling resources. You manage resources by virtue of explicit legal agency, or delegated authority. So what does that mean? Somebody has said that we want you to take care of this problem. Either legally, because your fire department says we're going to take care of it, or somebody who like, for example, the mayor will come to you and say, hey, we got this going on. We'd like for you to be the incident commander. They delegate the authority to you. But really what you're doing as the incident commander is you're establishing objectives and controlling resources, making sure you have enough resources, people, equipment, tools, supplies, whatever, to get the job done. So who is the incident commander? They're the officer at the top of an incident chain of command and in overall charge of the incident. Here's some important information here. The incident commander position must be established per 29 CFR 1910-120, HAZWOPER. HAZWOPER says you have to have an incident commander on a hazardous material incident. You have to have an incident commander on a hazardous materials incident. Somebody has to be in charge. Also, on a hazardous materials incident, they must be trained to the hazmat operations level. We'll say it again. The incident commander must be trained to the hazmat operations level to be the incident commander of a hazardous materials incident. After this class, you all can be incident commanders at a hazardous materials incident, because you will be trained to the hazmat operations level. Some of the responsibilities of the incident commander: they establish the site safety plan. They implement site security and control plan to limit the number of personnel operating in the control zones. They designate a safety officer. They make sure that the materials and conditions involved in the incident are identified. Now, when it says establishes a site safety plan, the incident commander doesn't have to write out a formal site safety plan. They can have a safety plan in their mind. Eventually, it needs to get written down. They can also designate somebody to come up with a site safety plan. Hey, look, they get designated safety officer. Safety officer, hey, buddy, you're the safety officer now. Come up with a site safety plan. It says identifies materials or conditions involved in the incident. The incident commander doesn't have to do that himself. They just need to make sure it gets done. They can go to the operations section chief and say, hey, get your hazmat science guys to figure out what this stuff is. They can go to the police and say, I need you to set up a perimeter so that nobody gets in. Now you have site security. They implement appropriate emergency operations. They start the actions that up to now, that we know how to do, is the ERG tells us to do. They make sure that the appropriate PPE is worn by all responders in restricted zones. They make sure the decontamination plan is in place and make sure it's used. And then also implement post-incident emergency response procedures. So what are we going to do once the emergency is over? Now, let's talk about transferring command. Let's say that an ambulance also responds to your hazardous material incident. And on that ambulance are 2 hazmat awareness level responders. And they arrive first. Okay? Since they are only trained to the hazmat awareness level, neither one of them can be the incident commander. Therefore, when you arrive in your fire truck, command needs to be transferred, because after this class, you're hazmat ops trained, you can be the incident commander. Okay? Now, if you're not the fire chief and your fire chief arrives on scene and they are at least trained to the hazmat ops level, now you can transfer command to them. These are some aspects of that. Keep in mind, command can only be transferred to someone who is on scene. So you get on scene, you get the command transferred to you. Your chief calls you and says on the phone and says, hey, what's going on? And you tell them, and they say, all right, I'll be in command. No, 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 no. While they're still en route and on the phone, they cannot be in command. Incident commander has to be on scene. Sometimes an incident is so large that the person who is relinquishing command and the person assuming command cannot meet face to face. That is the best way to do it, is face to face. That way we can clear up any, hopefully clear up any miscommunication that occurs using our nonverbal communication. If you cannot meet face to face, you can transfer command over the radio, but they do need to be on scene. When you relinquish command, you need to provide the person assuming command as clear a picture of the situation as possible. We'll talk about a way to manage that information as well. Remember, there is only one incident commander. There is only one incident commander. There is only one incident commander. You cannot have a fire incident commander, an EMS incident commander, a police incident commander, a tanker trucking company incident commander, or EPA incident commander. There is only one incident commander. You can't have a person from the mayor's office incident commander or street department incident commander. There is only one. So what's a way you can organize your transfer of command? One way is to follow the CAN report. CAN stands for conditions, actions, and needs. Conditions. Remember, this is one of those things that you can apply to situations outside of hazardous materials. It can be other incidents. It can be other things outside the fire department or your work. It can be done in your personal life. Somebody asks you, hey, how are things going? CAN report. You don't have to tell them that. Conditions. A summary of the incident. We have methyl ethyl death in this 407. It has been, the driver ran off the road, flipped over, and now it's leaking into this grass and it's heading toward this creek. No one's injured. There you go. That's your conditions. What's going on? What do you got? Conditions. Actions. So right now we are creating a dike surrounding the spill in order to keep it from entering the waterway, the creek. What do we need? We need a remediation company to come pick up the material. We need a tow truck to come right the truck and move it off site. What do you got? What are you doing? What do you need? That's it. transfer a command. I mentioned there's only one IC, one incident commander. So what happens when you have multiple agencies who have jurisdictional responsibility? You establish a unified command. Say a incident happens across municipal lines. You got two bordering cities or two bordering counties, two bordering states. Say you have a terrorist incident involving a hazardous material, multi-jurisdictional. Everyone needs to be on the same page. There is only one incident commander, right? But you can have a unified command system. They determine overall incident objectives. They select the strategies. They accomplish joint planning for tactical activities. They ensure integrated tactical operations and use all assigned resources effectively. If you have multiple jurisdictions, multiple agencies, all trying to request the same resources, you're going to get somebody is going to be without. We're all trying to deal with one issue, one incident. There's no reason for everybody to be requesting multiple resources. We just need the number of resources. The incident doesn't care who's in charge. So how does that work with one incident commander? So the unified command, people who's determined to need to be in that unified command, they elect or determine, designate a spokesperson. And that person speaks for all the agencies involved in the unified command. So that's command. Let's talk about safety officer. The safety officer is responsible for monitoring and identifying hazardous and unsafe situations and developing measures for ensuring personnel safety. Okay. Two things to think about, two things underlined there. The safety officer must be established per 29 CFR 1910-120, HAZWOPER, just like the incident commander. They have to be two separate people. You can't have the incident commander being the safety officer. So at minimum, at a hazardous material incident, you need two people, the incident commander and the safety officer. By law, that's your minimum. Here's where it differs a little bit from the incident commander. They must be trained, the safety officer must be trained to the level of the incident. What does that mean? Remember, the incident commander has to be trained to at least the operations level. The safety officer has to be trained to the level of the incident. Remember, we talked about the levels of the incident, being defensive or offensive. We haven't talked about non-intervention yet. But if we're going, remember, hazmat operations level personnel perform defensive actions, defensive tasks. If the incident commander determines that this incident can be managed through defensive actions, then it is the operation level incident. Therefore, the safety officer can be trained to the operations level. If they're higher, say technician, that's okay. That's the minimum training they have to have, is operations. If the incident commander determines that offensive actions are required, then the safety officer has to be trained to the technician level. That's the minimum. Does that make sense? The safety officer has to be trained to the level of incident. That is determined by the incident commander. So the safety officer could be more trained to a higher level than the incident commander. What do? They get a briefing from the incident commander. They review the incident action plans for safety issues. They participate in the preparation and monitoring of incident safety considerations. They maintain communications with the incident commander and advises them on deviations from the incident safety considerations and of any dangerous situations. The second set of eyes for the incident commander, looking out for safety of the responders. Here's something underlined, must mean it's important. The safety officer can alter, suspend, or terminate any activity that they judge to be unsafe. So there's two people. Okay, now I'm going to take that back. We used to teach that there's two people who can put a halt to emergency response. That's the incident commander or the safety officer. That's no longer the case. Anyone can speak up and say, this isn't safe, let's come up with a new plan. We want to empower people to have the confidence to say, I don't think this is a good idea. What do you think, safety officer? Okay. But for testing purposes, the safety officer can alter, suspend, or terminate any activity that is judged to be unsafe. They also conduct the safety briefings for entry team personnel before entry. So they'll provide them information on what the materials are, what the hazards of the materials are, signs and symptoms, how the routes of exposure, things like that. They will tell them, make sure they know where the decon point is, so they know where to go get deconned when they're done doing their job. There we go. Description of the site, tasks to be performed, duration of the task, what PPE you're going to wear, what monitoring you're going to use. We talked about the risks. When you involve potential criminal or terrorist activities, we're going to remind you to be alert for secondary devices, no touching or moving any suspicious looking articles, no touching or entering any damp, wet, or oily areas. You're going to wear full protective clothing, including SCBA. We're going to limit the number of people entering the crime scene. I'm going to add that to incidents involving potential criminal or terrorist activities. We're going to document all actions. Everything we do is going to get written down. You're not going to pick anything up, take any souvenirs, no photographing or videotaping anything suspicious. I'm sorry. We're going to photograph and videotape anything suspicious. Don't destroy possible evidence and seek professional crime scene assistance. That's going to be the FBI for us, usually, when we come to criminal or terrorist activities. Let's talk about the rest of the members of the command staff. So we've talked about incident commander and the safety officer. Let's talk about the public information officer, or PIO. They're responsible for developing and releasing information about the incident to the news media, to incident personnel, and to other appropriate agencies and organizations. A lot of people don't think about information going to incident personnel, but the PIO is responsible for that as well. Not just external delivery of information, but also internal to the incident delivery of information, depending on the size. Rounding out the command staff is the liaison officer. They're assigned to the incident to be the contact for assisting and or cooperating agency representatives. Like I mentioned, the trucking company, for using any heavy equipment, whoever owns that, the EPA, if we're having food brought in, it's usually the Red Cross, and the liaison officer will be dealing with that. All right, so let's talk about the command post and some characteristics of the command post. No particular order, because it's 112. That just got screwed up. It must provide accessibility for the IC, which means they need to be able to get in and out of the command post so they can see what's going on. It can't be so remote that it's impractical. Ideally, they allow the incident commander to observe the scene, and needs to be readily identifiable. The command post, Can be a predetermined location, a conveniently located building, or a radio-equipped vehicle located in a safe area. Remember, that safe area is going to be the cold zone. Because when we start out, we have the hot zone. How's that determined? Through the ERG and the cold zone. Upwind, crosswind. We talked about transferring command. So taking command, remember the first person on the scene or the ranking individual of the first fire company on the scene assumes command. You're the first one there. Look around. Everybody's looking at you. You're in charge. You're the incident commander right now. The incident commander of a hazardous material incident must have IMS training, incident management system training, and be at the hazardous materials operations level. Well, you're getting your IMS training and you're getting your hazmat ops training. So at the end of this class, guess what? You are qualified to be a hazardous material incident commander. You will maintain that command until a higher ranking or more extensively trained responder arrives on the scene and assumes command. That's within your organization usually. If you request the hazmat team does not come in and take over. We do not assume command of your scene. We plug in under the operations section chief as a resource. We will provide you technical information and expertise and advise you on options. You choose which option you're going to take because you're the incident commander. You're in charge. Now we're going to talk about the section chiefs of the general staff. We're going to talk about finance. Financial services are established at some, but not all incidents. They have some sub-units called the time unit, procurement unit, compensation unit, claims unit, and cost unit. These are for big incidents. You have a finance section chief. Multi-day. Logistics, they're the support mechanism for the organization. They provide services and support systems to the organizational components. So they provide medical. The support branch provides medical care for the responders, communications for the responders, and food services for the responders. The service branch provides supplies, facilities, a place to work or go to the bathroom, and ground support, moving stuff around. Operations. The responsibility for the direct management of all incident tactical activities, the tactical priorities, and the safety and welfare of personnel working under the operations section. They're the ones in charge of getting the incident taken care of at the tactical level. And then finishing up the general staff planning. They're responsible for gathering, assimilating, analyzing, processing information needed for effective decision making. The incident commander can't make effective decisions if they don't gather information and process that in an effective way. The units under the planning section chief are the resources unit, situation unit, documentation unit, and the demobilization unit. When we talk about hazmat group positions specifically, we'll show a picture here in a second. So you have the incident commander, an operations section chief, and then a hazmat group. You might have a fire group, an EMS group, a public works group. Just depends. Again, remember this incident management system is modular. It expands and contracts as you need it. You could have the hazardous materials or hazmat group supervisor. They're the ones that reports to the operations section chief. You can have an entry team leader, a decontamination leader, site access control leader, assistant safety officer for hazardous materials specifically. You have a technical specialist. Remember, there's Back to the assistant safety officer. You have the safety officer for the entire incident, and then you can have a hazardous materials safety officer as well. You can have a technical specialist, and then a safe refuge area manager. Don't have to have all these positions. These are just some of the positions that may be created depending on the size of the incident and the incident needs, response needs. So here's the zooming in on the operations section chief. Under them, you might have staging, like I said, a hazmat group, a fire group, or an EMS group. Under the hazmat group, you'd have the hazmat group leader, and then the hazmat assistant safety officer. And you might have an entry group, a decon group, a science group, a recon group, and a rehab group. You might not have a specific rehab group for the hazmat. You might have a rehab group for all of operations. So that ends the more information gathering, response assistance, and the incident management system.